The world was never meant to be this way. There was a time when the air carried the scent of rain, not smoke, when rivers hummed softly through green valleys, not beneath bridges of rust and steel, and the earth, she breathed, slowly, peacefully, in rhythm with every living being. But then we came. At first we came as children of the soil, humble, curious, learning from the wind and the water. We built homes from mud, tools from stone, and dreams from sunlight. The planet gave, and we took, but we took with gratitude, until one day gratitude turned into greed. The first machines were small, innocent even, wheels turning in fields, steam hissing like a dragon tamed. But soon the hunger grew. Men found power in coal, then in oil, then in fire itself. Factories rose like fortresses of ambition, and the skies darkened. The hum of life became the roar of progress. They called it civilization, but the earth called it pain. Forests fell, one tree, 1 acre, 1 forest at a time. Oceans filled with the ghosts of our waste. Animals fled. Rivers choked, and the winds began to forget their direction. We said it was development. We said it was the future. But every invention was a quiet betrayal. Every spark of light cost us a piece of the sun, and yet we didn't see it. We celebrated our machines, our towers, our weapons. We built cities that kissed the clouds and buried our roots beneath them. The stars disappeared behind the smoke, and we forgot they were ever there. Nature tried to whisper, through storms, through droughts, through dying coral and melting ice. She spoke, but her voice was drowned by the noise of engines and greed. We thought we had conquered her, but the truth was simpler. We had only silenced her for a while. Then came the first imbalance, a strange stillness in the seasons, rain that refused to fall where it once did, and rivers that vanished where they once sang. The soil began to dry. The air began to burn, and the balance began to crack. The elders said it was a warning. The young said it was science. But none could deny. The world was changing, and deep beneath our feet, the earth began to stir. She had given us everything, food, water, breath, shelter, and now she began to take notice. Every quake, every storm, every heat wave. They were not disasters. They were reminders. Reminders that no empire, no machine, no human ambition could exist without her blessing. But mankind had forgotten what blessing meant. We no longer prayed to the sky. We polluted it. We no longer thanked the soil. We drilled into it. And when the forests fell silent, we built factories to fill the silence. The planet was still alive, but she was hurting. And like any living being pushed too far, she began to prepare for her defense. At first, it was subtle. The bees started disappearing. The winters became confused. The rain came at the wrong times, or didn't come at all. The animals moved to places they had never gone before, as if escaping something unseen. But we didn't listen. We adjusted our air conditioners. We built stronger dams. We created more machines to fix the damage done by our earlier machines, and the cycle continued. The balance tilted. One heartbeat, one species, one decision at a time. And through it all, the earth waited. Waited for the day when her whispers would no longer be ignored, when her silence would turn into a storm, because the truth was never hidden. It was always there, under our feet, above our heads, and within our breath. When you wound the earth, you wound yourself. And when you forget that truth, the earth does not punish. She simply corrects. And that correction was about to begin. The warnings had been there all along, in the cracks of dry earth, in the strange silence of the forests, in the storms that came too soon and left too late. But humanity had grown deaf, drunk on power, addicted to progress. We called it evolution, but it was intoxication. The cities had grown vast, glowing skeletons of glass and steel, where the stars had no permission to shine. Machines whispered through every corner of existence, and screens replaced the sky. Children learned to swipe before they learned to touch the soil. Men who once watched the sunrise now watched stock prices, and the air, thick, heavy, tired, carried the price of every dream we had stolen from the earth. But we didn't stop. We built faster. We dug deeper. We burned brighter. Our oceans became graveyards of forgotten ships and floating plastic. Our forests became memories printed on recycled paper. And our hearts, those fragile instruments of empathy, became mechanical too. The balance that once held the world together began to crumble. The ice melted, the sea rose, and the storms grew angrier. Still, we refused to see it. We built walls to stop the waves, not realizing the ocean was not the enemy. We created algorithms to predict disasters, not realizing we were the disaster. We planted artificial trees while cutting down the real ones. We spoke about sustainability in air-conditioned rooms, over plastic water bottles. It was a strange kind of madness. Intelligence without wisdom, invention without intention. The world was burning, but we called it innovation. The skies turned gray, but we called it industrial success. Species vanished, but we called it collateral damage. And so, the earth began her quiet rebellion. Volcanoes that had slept for centuries began to stir. Floods swallowed entire cities that once mocked nature's power. Fires danced across continents, consuming everything, homes, forests, even memories. The sky, once blue, turned into a sheet of ash. It was not punishment. It was balance, returning to claim its debt. The age of comfort began to decay. Electric grids failed. Crops refused to grow. The soil became bitter, as if it remembered every wound. Governments called it climate emergency. Scientists called it global crisis. But the earth called it something simpler: revenge. Still, humanity tried to fight back. We built domes to block the heat, bunkers beneath the soil, and machines to make artificial air. But how long could we live in cages built from our own fear? The rich fled to safer lands. The poor were left to drown, to burn, to vanish. Nations turned against each other for food, for water, for survival. Borders meant nothing when the sky itself was collapsing. And yet, even then, we didn't stop. We looked to the stars, not for wonder, but for escape. Mars became our next promise, our next lie. If this world dies, we said, we'll build another. But there are no second chances when you betray the mother that raised you. The earth's pulse began to fade. The songs of birds, the hum of bees, the whisper of the wind, they grew fainter every day. A silence fell across the planet. Not peaceful, but hollow. A silence born of extinction. Children were born under gray skies, never knowing what blue meant. They played under filtered light, breathing recycled air, drinking purified tears of the earth. And they asked their parents, "Did the world ever smell like flowers?" And the parents could not answer, because they, too, had forgotten. We had become strangers in the home that once cradled us. The soil no longer recognized our footsteps. The rivers no longer carried our reflections, and the sky no longer watched over us. This was not the apocalypse we imagined. No explosions, no war between gods and men. It was quieter, simpler, more tragic. The world didn't end with fire. It ended with forgetting. For centuries, we had written myths about the fall of man. Adam from Eden, Icarus from the sky, Atlantis beneath the waves. We thought they were stories, but they were prophecies, and now we had become our own myth, a civilization so advanced it could touch the stars, and yet so blind it couldn't see its own reflection in the water. The machines we built began to outlive us. Cities turned into skeletons of progress, glowing faintly, humming softly, waiting for masters who would never return. And somewhere in the ruins, among the dust and silence, the earth began to breathe again, faintly, painfully, but alive, because even in her suffering she was patient. Even in her destruction she was forgiving. But for humanity, the fall had already begun. The world had grown still. The noise of engines had faded. The hum of progress gone. What remained were whispers, the creaking of broken towers, the sigh of wind through empty streets, the cry of the earth remembering how to breathe again. For the first time in centuries, there was no human roar to drown her voice. Cities, once monuments of pride, had turned into graveyards of ambition. Skyscrapers stood like ghosts, their glass eyes shattered, their steel bones rusting in the rain. Roads that once throbbed with motion, now cracked beneath the slow march of moss and weeds. And in that silence, something extraordinary began to happen. The earth, left alone, began to heal. Tiny sprouts forced their way through concrete. Animals returned to places they had fled generations ago. Rivers, once poisoned, began to run clear. Not because we cleansed them, but because we were gone. The planet did what we never could. She forgave us by forgetting us. But not all humans were gone. Scattered across the wastelands, small groups remained. Survivors of the storm, descendants of arrogance. They lived not in cities, but in ruins, learning once again to build with their hands, to read the sky, to listen to the wind. They no longer spoke of profit or power. They spoke of food, water, warmth, the old languages of existence. And slowly, painfully, they began to remember what it meant to belong to the earth, not own it. There were no governments now, no borders, no flags, only tribes, wanderers, healers, listeners. Among them there rose a generation of seekers, those who still believed that humanity had a place in the world's story. They carried old books, fragments of songs, faded photographs, pieces of memory from the age of blindness. They built small fires and told stories of the old world, of oceans that once glittered, forests that whispered, skies that shone like mirrors of heaven. Children listened with wide eyes, as if hearing a fairy tale. To them, blue sky was a myth, rain was a miracle, and yet hope stirred. One morning, after countless gray dawns, a child saw something strange on the horizon, a faint shimmer of light cutting through the mist. It was not fire, not pollution, it was color, the first sunrise in 100 years. The people gathered in silence, tears reflecting gold and crimson. For the first time in generations, the sky remembered its color, and so did they. The world was still broken, but it was alive, and in that fragile life, a seed of realization took root. Perhaps this fall was never a punishment. Perhaps it was a lesson, a chance to start again, smaller, slower, wiser. The survivors began to walk the earth, not as conquerors, but as students. They followed the rivers, learned from the soil, planted where they had destroyed. They studied the stars again, not to escape, but to understand their place beneath them. Old technologies were rediscovered, not the machines of greed, but tools of balance. Windmills returned, solar fires burned gently, water wheels turned once more, not to power cities, but to sustain villages. and for the first time in millennia, the human heart began to align with the planet's pulse. There were still challenges: hunger, disease, storms, but they faced them together. They began to build communities rooted in respect, not rule. The concept of ownership faded. The idea of caretaking grew. Elders taught the children the truth their ancestors had forgotten. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to her. And as generations passed, the memory of the old world, the age of greed and fire, became legend. They called it the era of noise, a time when man mistook progress for power and forgot his own origin. They vowed never to repeat it. Instead of cathedrals of steel, they built gardens of worship, open spaces where people gathered to thank the soil and sky. Instead of rulers, they chose guardians. Instead of praying for heaven, they learned to honor the ground beneath their feet. And slowly, the balance returned. Birds filled the air again. The seas shimmered with life. Forests sang in green symphonies, and mountains stood watch like ancient gods reborn. The earth, though scarred, was blooming. She had survived us, and, miraculously, she had kept a place for us too. But the memory of the fall never truly faded. In dreams, the survivors still saw visions of burning skies, collapsing towers and rivers of ash. They remembered, because forgetting was the first mistake. And so the elders taught their young, listen to the wind. When she grows restless, remember the past. When the trees fall silent, remember the cost. And when the earth whispers, answer with gratitude, not greed. It was no longer a world of dominance. It was a world of dialogue between human and earth, sky and seed, fire and rain. And in that fragile harmony, the planet found peace. But peace is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a choice. Because somewhere, deep in the forgotten corners of the world, machines still slept, waiting for human hands to wake them. And the question remained, would we remember the lesson or repeat the mistake? The turning point had come. The next chapter would decide everything. The world was not reborn in an instant. There was no flash of light, no voice from the heavens. The earth did not announce her renewal. She simply began to breathe again. The rivers whispered first. Then the trees began to hum. The wind carried new songs through the valleys, and the mountains echoed them back, like an ancient conversation restored. It was as if the planet had been waiting for humanity to remember how to listen. And now, at last, we did. The survivors of the old world became the ancestors of the new. They taught their children the sacred rhythm of the seasons, the value of silence, the meaning of enough. They built their homes beside rivers, not upon them. They planted trees before temples, and temples beneath trees. The new civilization had no kings, no borders, no walls. Its strength was not measured by armies, but by harmony. Every village, every tribe lived as a thread in the same vast fabric of life. They learned from the ruins of their ancestors. Cities half buried in moss, machines rusted into the soil. Those ruins were not shunned, they were honored. Each was a reminder carved in steel and stone. Never again. The people called themselves keepers of the earth. Their creed was simple: to take only what was needed and to give back twice as much. For the first time, progress did not mean conquest. It meant coexistence. Energy came from the sun, not from fire. Homes breathed with the seasons, built from wood and stone, not plastic and glass. Technology existed, but it served life instead of consuming it. Machines were companions now, quiet, humble, learning from the forest rather than replacing it. Even language changed. Words like mine and profit faded away. New words bloomed: balance, respect, belonging, and with each generation, humanity grew softer, not weaker but wiser. They learned to see divinity not in temples or idols, but in the dance of light on leaves, in the laughter of rivers, in the birth of rain. The earth had forgiven, and in her forgiveness she had given us another chance. But she had also made her boundaries clear. Storms still came. Volcanoes still roared. The planet reminded us, gently but firmly, that harmony was not a gift. It was a responsibility, and this time humanity listened. When drought came, they prayed through planting. When flood came, they rebuilt without anger. When the wind howled, they bowed their heads and waited, not as victims, but as children before a mother's voice. Generations passed, and stories became scripture. The tale of the old world, the era of noise, was told by the fire each night, not to frighten, but to remind. There was a time, the elders said, when humans thought they were gods. They built towers to touch the sky, and forgot the ground beneath their feet. The earth wept, and they did not listen, so she slept, and took them with her dreams. But when they awoke, they remembered love, and so the children grew with reverence in their eyes. They did not ask for more, they asked for meaning. They did not conquer, they cultivated. They did not pray for heaven, they protected earth. As centuries flowed like rivers, the scars of the past became stories carved into time. Forests covered the bones of cities. Coral grew over the remains of ships. The air shimmered again, blue and free. The world had not been destroyed. It had been reborn, and humanity had been humbled into grace. At dawn, the people would gather on the hills to greet the sun. They would sing not in worship, but in gratitude, for the breath in their lungs, for the warmth on their skin, for the second chance they did not deserve, but were given anyway. They called this new era the Age of Return, the time when humanity found its way home. And if you listened closely, you could hear it, the heartbeat of the world, steady and kind, echoing through every living thing. The same earth that once cried now sang. The same humanity that once fell now knelt, not in defeat, but in understanding. And from that understanding came the truest form of progress, not the rise of machines, but the rebirth of meaning. Because in the end, the story was never about destruction. It was about remembrance. The world does not die when we forget her. She dies when we forget ourselves. But when we remember, truly remember, that we are part of her, not above her, then, and only then, the earth smiles again. The dawn has returned. The story continues, not as a warning this time, but as a promise.